But nevertheless, that's how a record's made isn't important to the audience. What's important to them is what they're hearing.
The news of the sudden death of Tom Petty's death shook the very foundations of the entertainment industry, bringing into perspective the troubles and dangers that entertainers often face. The job goes beyond the glamour, entailing more rigors than anyone could imagine. In Tom Petty's case, these challenges went beyond his work life to include even his private life. His life was anything but smooth, filled with many challenges, right from a very early stage. Join us as we explore these in detail. Tom Petty was born on October 20th, 1950, in Gainesville, Florida. His childhood was rather complicated within the family circle, especially in reference to his father, Earl Petty. Earl was a rigid and sometimes crude man, which made life a bit difficult for his son. He had a violent temper and was often physically and emotionally abusive. Later in life, Petty remembered his father as a difficult figure who did not believe in his talents and artistic inclinations. That strained relationship set Petty up, giving him the resilience that would see him forge his path. Against the bleakness at home, Tom found inspiration in music, which was both his escape and calling. Petty was a young 6-year-old whose musical life got off to a good start. In 1956, the defining moment was when his uncle was on set in Ocala, Florida, working on the movie Follow That Dream, starring Elvis Presley. Tom's uncle had arranged for him to visit the set, and it was on set that he came face-to-face with Elvis in person. The young boy was amazed by Elvis Presley's charisma and talent, which lit like a fire. He would later remember that Elvis seemed like a god when he came on, and that was when he made his decision to become a musician. This was how Petty grew obsessed with a dream to play music and start drenching his soul into rock and roll, blues, and countryside vibes, elements of which also feature strongly later in his works. By the time he was in his teens, Tom had taught himself how to play the guitar and became deeply active in the local music scene. In high school, he played in a number of groups, including his first, the Sundowners, followed by the Epics, which eventually morphed into Mudcrutch. Mudcrutch was to represent Petty's first real leap at breaking it big into the world of music. In the early 1970s, the band moved to Los Angeles in hopes of getting a record contract. Mudcrutch wasn't a very long-lasting band. However, it did serve as an excellent learning tool for Petty, teaching him most things about the music business, writing songs, and performing them. In 1975, Mudcrutch disbanded and laid building blocks for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Petty would later form Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers back in 1976, himself being the frontman and key songwriter. It was also back that year that the band made its self-named album release, which basically did not perform well in America. Surprisingly, however, it did surprisingly well in England, where they had a major hit with a song entitled Breakdown. This success propelled the band ahead, and thus they began making a loyal fan base. Their second album, You're Gonna Get It, further solidified their reputation, but it was their third album, Damn the Torpedoes, that catapulted them to stardom. The album featured iconic tracks like Refugee and Don't Do Me Like That, which became anthems of the era. Commercial and critical success no doubt proved that Damn the Torpedoes, which reached number 2 on the Billboard charts, was part of the major rock acts at that time. Throughout the 1980s, Petty consolidated that success with a string of hit albums and singles. Hard Promises yielded the hit The Waiting. Southern accents underlined his Southern roots with the hit Don't Come Around Here No More. His work with the group The Traveling Wilburys, along with legends Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne, further sealed his status as a music icon. The first album by The Traveling Wilburys, Volume 1, which came out in 1988, was full of camaraderie and great talent. Petty's participation in the project underlined his versatility and how easily he could hold his place in the company of some of the greatest rock artists of all time. Along with his work with both the Heartbreakers and the Traveling Wilburys, Petty chalked up a pretty estimable solo career. His first solo album, Full Moon Fever from 1989, was moderately successful, carrying timeless hits like Free Fallin' and I Won't Back Down. These songs cemented his skill as a musician and touched listeners in a lasting way. For the most part, Tom Petty's growth as a musician was dependent on his real nature and commitment to work rather than on commercial success. He has been known more for his artistic integrity and staunch devotion to the same, and often for frequent battles against the pressure of the music world. In the early 1980s, he famously fought his record label MCA over being transferred to the label without his consent when MCA bought ABC. Petty won a reputation among fans and fellow musicians alike for being defiant and standing up for what he considered right. His emotional lyrics, accessible melodies, and timelessness spoke to several generations of listeners. Anthems such as American Girl, Learning to Fly, and Mary Jane's Last Dance transcend decades and even genres of music. Well beyond his own records, Petty's impact and influence resonated across all genres of musicians. Petty's sound mixed rock, folk, and country. In fact, even during continuous changes to tastes and trends in music through the years, he remained consistent with anything that could get out there. Simply an icon in the indomitable spirit of rock and roll. From the tough upbringing in Gainesville to rock icon, the story of Tom Petty tells a tale of survival, talent, and love for music. His early struggles with his father and the life-changing encounter with Elvis Presley set him on a path of following his dream. Be it through the works of the Heartbreakers, the Traveling Wilburys, or going solo, Tom Petty left prints in the minds of the people he touched with his music. However, Petty didn't have it all smooth on his part. His talents and drives led him high, but with many personal and professional demons putting him through serious tests. One of the most dramatic struggles he had in his career was the fight against his record company, MCA, which, besides trying to compromise his artistic freedom, involved him in a legal struggle that went to the highest stakes and forced him to declare bankruptcy. It was one of those critical times in Petty's career where he stood his ground and wasn't really letting anyone push him around. With MCA, Petty didn't have much progress on a major scale until the late 1970s after Damn the Torpedoes. The label had taken over the contract from Shelter Records, for whom Petty was signing at the time. MCA responded by pandering his contract to another label of their choice without his approval, which was a personal affront, betraying all notion of artistic freedom. Petty felt his back was against the wall and he was ready to fight. He filed a lawsuit against MCA in hopes of voiding the contract and taking back his music. He declared bankruptcy as a move against the label to save his integrity and independence as an artist. The bankruptcy declaration became a sort of tactical declaration not to let MCA seize his assets during the process of the lawsuit. This extreme step, unexpected from a rising star, became unprecedented. Moreover, Petty's defiant act drew applause from both the audience and his musician colleagues, who cheered him for such bravery. The ensuing court battle lasted for several months and placed enormous financial and emotional burdens on Petty. The musician refused to yield. Ultimately, MCA backed down, renegotiated his contract, and offered Petty much greater creative control with a significantly more lucrative deal. That victory marked a turning point in his career and forever cemented his reputation as a principled artist who refused to compromise his values for corporate gain. While Petty was fighting for his career in very public view, he was fighting deeply personal demons behind the scenes. But to console him was his mother, Kitty Petty, who later started facing some challenges herself. Kitty did not just get old, she became incapacitated too. Yet with his rising fame, Petty had remained quite close to his family, and the terminal disease his mother struggled with weighed heavily upon him. She finally passed away, which saddened him and left indelible marks on him, changing his perceptions about life forever. Meanwhile, Petty's marriage to his first wife, Jane Benyo, was also breaking down. The couple married in 1974, and had to work through the strain of a stressful career, with Petty always being on the road and dealing with growing stardom. It was also a struggle between two mismatched people. Tensions always built up so easily between the couple. As if that wasn't enough, it was further strained by Jane's struggle with addictions and mental health problems. After a truly honest attempt by both spouses to make the marriage work, they finally separated, and their divorce was officially complete in 1996. The separation of this marriage was a sad phase, with most of the songs Petty wrote at that period being related to heartbreak, loss, and growing survivalist instincts. Adding to Petty's personal turmoil around this same period, the artist suffered a terrible incident in 1987 when his Encino, California home suffered heavy damage from a fire that began in the early morning hours when Petty, along with his soon-to-be second wife Dana York and the kids, escaped through a back exit. The house got gutted, and with it went many of Petty's personal belongings. Seemingly traumatic, that fire was something Petty looked back to more as a turning point, which forced him to reassess his priorities. First, he became so minimalist in his approach to life, focusing on what mattered most. Petty was good at channeling the struggles he faced in life to his music. Songs like Refugee, I Won't Back Down, and Learning to Fly reflected his resilience, fighting to make it through some tough times. His songs were soothing and an inspiration for the listeners struggling in their own way, as they would find their feelings well represented through his lyrics. Petty fought those big battles, including those with his record label, the death of his mother, the breakup of his first marriage, and that devastating fire that took his home. In each of those events, something much deeper had tested him, but he maintained his focus. Amidst everything, he remained true to himself, refusing to bend or compromise his values or his vision. Sailing through with dignity and resolution is itself the character that will also make him always remembered as one of the most iconic figures in rock and roll. In the end, Tom Petty's story is about overcoming adversity. His struggles against the music business, his losses and setbacks in his private life brought him closer to his audience. His music was the medium for his travels through honesty, vulnerability, and stern beliefs in the powers of rock and roll. The things that Petty leaves behind are not just incredible songs, but an example of an artist who remained true to himself no matter the cost. Later in life, Tom Petty struggled with deep inner pain and personal triumphs as he tried to work out the complexities of fame, relationships, and health issues. Following the breakup of his first marriage in 1996, Petty carried on into a period of emotional turmoil that took him down a dark path. The ending of his marriage, coupled with the stresses of his career and the remains of his earlier struggles, finally began to take their toll on his mental and physical health. At the time, Petty turned to drugs as a way to try to cope with life's hurts and uncertainties. He would later confess to having tried heroin, something he would later claim he regretted ever doing. It was really one of the dark parts of his life when all those struggles built up, making him so isolated, lost, and alone. In the long run, Petty's determination to overcome those evils placed him on track to find help and reclaim his life. During these difficult times in Petty's life, he had a love interest in Dana York, whom he would eventually go on to marry. The two met for the very first time during the early 1990s, when Dana was attending one of the concerts by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. A music enthusiast herself, Dana was awed from day one by this man's earnestness and by his talent. And over time, the two became close and they started to date in the mid-1990s. Supportive and understanding, Dana saw Petty through the worst times. She was always there to catch him when he was getting back on his feet and trying to kick his addiction. Respectful of each other, their love for each other, and a love of music made them perfectly suited to each other. Petty and Dana then married in 2001, basing it on a foundation of friendship that began 2 years earlier. Dana was the one who brought Petty a much-needed stabilizing influence into his life. For Petty, marriage in his later years has brought him a sense of peace and happiness that had always seemed elusive. However, things were about to take an even darker turn for Petty. In 2017, Petty had gone on tour with the Heartbreakers for their 40th anniversary, during which he seriously hurt his hip. Petty had also been touring even with a fractured hip, which caused him quite a lot of pain and discomfort. Instead of resting and being treated, Petty persisted through the pain just to be able to continue performing. Petty's love for his fans and love for music was forcing him to carry on with the tour, despite his body's condition. However, the performance one night took a great toll on his body and added more strain to it. Since Petty was unaware of the scale of the injury he had suffered. Besides the complications of the injury, he also developed a condition where his knee got exacerbated and also emphysema. By the time the tour ended, Petty was in poor health but insisted on going forward. Right on October 2, 2017, 1 week after the last show of the tour, Petty suffered from cardiac arrest at his Malibu, California home. He was taken to the hospital but could not be revived. News of the 66-year-old's death sent shockwaves across the music world, and all fans and musicians were stunned to hear of the demise of a true legend. It was revealed later that Petty was on various pain medications at the time of his death, some quite potent. Most likely, a mixture of these drugs contributed to his untimely demise. His passing served as another stark notice of how much damage a life as an entertainer can have on even someone as resilient as Tom Petty. Tom Petty's legacy is one of enduring influence and timeless artistry. He created a body of work that spoke to millions of fans around the world throughout his career. His music, with its lyrics of deep emotion, catchy melodies, and the spirit of rock and roll, crossed generations and genres. Anthems like Free Fallin', American Girl, I Won't Back Down, and Refugee defined a generation and continued to fire up newer listeners today. His songs spoke to his realities, being honest and emotive. These are points that made his fans love and remember him. Beyond the music, Tom Petty's legacy is defined by his steadfast devotion to artistic principles. Throughout a career marked by battles with the pressures of the music industry on his rights as an artist, he never gave in to those pressures. His record label battles, insisting on creative control, and even the risks he took, all mark him as a real pioneer. Petty's influence went far beyond the records he made, inspiring a whole legion of musicians with his sincerity, work ethic, and devotion to the craft. Everybody from all genres has named Petty as one of the major influences, and his influence on rock and roll is simply not to be measured. The music world will remember Tom Petty as one of the pioneers who never sold out to himself or his art. He received many awards for his work in music, including inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Even in his death, Petty's music is still speaking to people for its timeless quality and universal appeal. His estate posthumously released an album in his name, An American Treasure, in 2018. This was in critical acclaim to celebrate Petty's life and career. Petty had in him the spirit of never giving up, passion, and authenticity. The ups and downs in both his personal and professional life were immense, but he had never been derailed from his love for music or lost his pledge to his fans. This is a story about survival and success, which stretches from unstable childhood in Gainesville, Florida, to his status as one of the most adored figures in rock and roll. His music will live on to inspire and uplift for many generations yet to come and make sure the memory of Petty continues to live on. That's all about the life and struggles of Tom Petty. Let us know your fond memory of him in the comments, and we will see you all in the next one.